right. Mike, can you tell if it's being recorded on the, uh, nope, it's being recorded. Okay, now let me do the live stream. Give me a second.
I was gonna say yes, sir, it is.
All right. Okay. Righty. Uh, Now my screen disappeared. It happened last week. Can you guys see me?
Yes.
You
Yes,
could
sir,
see
we
me.
can.
Okay, well, I can't see you. Let me see if I get out of this. Hello, can you see me?
Yes, sir.
We can.
All right. Well, one of these days I'll figure out why everything changed about 2 weeks ago. But I don't see anybody, so Mike, you'll have to be my eyes. And it's going to be hard for me to interact, but I'll do my best. So today we're going to talk about 7 significant challenges in transition. And when we think about transition, we're talking about specifically today a transition when it comes to ministry, but you could apply these particular principles in any kind of transition in your life, whether it's, relational transitions, organizational transitions, or whatever. Um, we are primarily a table for those in the ecclesial realm, so we're going to utilize transitions from one ministry to another or church or whatever. And I picked Dr. Mark Sharoner and Bishop Kyle Searcy, both of them bishops, um, because both of them, along with myself, have transitioned out of leading a local church. And in my studies, which I can't claim to be an expert, but just through observation, and I think the name of the book I read was called Next. Dr. Mark probably knows that book, Next. They did extensive research on what, uh, how many of these transitions are successful and are there universal applicable principles that can be utilized for all of us to ensure a successful transition. And I was shocked at the honesty of this book. They basically concluded by saying there is no foolproof way of having a successful transition. They said there are those who had a several year plan, maybe up to 5 years, 3 years. They thought about everything they possibly can, but they might have picked the wrong person, so it didn't work. Or they utilize what we would call nepotism. They would just pick somebody because they're related to them, and that doesn't always work. Uh, and then something can happen by accident. A guy just drops dead, and somebody arises, and it becomes an incredible uh, transition to a new leader. So it's not a foolproof science. Obviously, we need to hear from the Lord. Um, and so we're not getting into the mechanisms of that aspect of transition. We're not talking about planning for transition. We're talking about challenges in transition, big difference. So we're assuming there is already a transition and or about a transition about to take place in this particular table. So this is not a teaching on how to transition, but on what you will or can experience. And I've transitioned out of leading our several campuses. It'll be 2 years this coming June. And I wrote this out of the context of my own experience and based on observation from others. And so every transition, Mike, I don't know if you want to show my notes and uh, you know what? Mike, you know what? Take the notes down because I want to interact with Mark and Kyle for each point, and it would be better if I didn't have that up there. Okay, I could send the notes out. So at every transition, whether personal, professional, spiritual, it has a set of challenges. And for us, it's not just moving from one phase of life to another, but about moving from one phase of our purpose or a new level of purpose and calling. So we have to understand that it has to do with a shift in purpose or a greater expression of your original purpose that God has given you. And along with this are spiritual and emotional shifts that can be very difficult to navigate. I remember when I finally transitioned out of leading the church, and I'm the kind of guy I don't micromanage, even when I am leading. I know how to move on. I don't get in anybody's way. And, I'm just there as a mentor to give advice to the pastor. But I extracted myself from certain elders' meetings and things dealing with the everyday affairs. And I'm just there in case of an emergency. So, um, if you're doing a long-term transition, you can't do it that quickly, obviously. So this was something in the making for a while. Uh, so I'm not against, you go into elders meetings, finance meetings, all that in the very beginning, but our transition was kind of mature in some ways. So when you step into something like that, I was struggling for the first month, especially the first month. I was dealing with psychological guilt because I was not uh, handling certain things and uh, not in the same rhythm I used to have. And I was wondering, I intellectually, I knew I was okay. I was obeying God, but emotionally, the way I was programmed, I was feeling weird and guilty that I'm not involved in what's going on in the church and, certain decisions, financial decisions, things with the elders, and even the pressure of the mental pressure and responsibility of handling a church. So I was going through some psychological warfare there for about a month. It got better after the second month. Now I'm fine, but I think that would probably be a normal thing. And then determining who was preaching was a big shift for me because I wasn't determining the preaching schedule. I didn't even know the preaching schedule. Uh, I was able to step in whenever I needed to. Now it's up to someone else to tell me when to step in. And so at first I was preaching once a month in each campus. And then now this year, it looks as though I'm only going to preach once a quarter in only one of the campuses. And that's what I told the new pastor who happened to be my biological son, Justin. I said, the first 2 years, I should probably preach once a month so that it doesn't trigger anybody thinking that I abandoned them and it's better for the sheep for stability. But I said, after, a few years, probably once a quarter would be best because I also don't want to be limited in what engagements I take. So that's probably what's happening now. So let me start with the first principle, and I've already alluded to it a bit in my intro. First principle of a challenge that you may face in a transition is having a hard time letting go of the past. So often our identity, even our sense of security and comfort are tied to familiar places, roles, and relationships of our previous season. This creates an emotional attachment that makes it hard to release what once was even when we know God is calling us to something new. As Paul encourages us in Philippians chapter 3, verse 13 and 14, he said to forget what is behind, strain towards what is ahead. This doesn't mean that we literally forget our past, but rather that we stop allowing it to define us or hold us back from our future. We have to be willing to embrace the unknown and trust that God's plans for the future are greater than anything we experienced before. Letting go of the past is an act of faith that opens the door for new opportunities and growth. So we have to forget what is behind. So I'm going to ask Dr. Mark and Bishop Kyle to weigh in after each point. And so we'll just have a running conversation because each point is poignant. So, Dr. Mark, you transitioned how long ago? And
Fully,
I have to be careful because this is live stream. In New York, when you say you transitioned, it can mean something else. We're talking about transitioning into a new ministry. For those who want to take a clip out of context. So,
well, given I'm a dysfunctional New York Italian, anything's possible, right? Especially these days. But in our journey toward transition was about 3 years. Misty's been with me for 17 years, Mario for 15. And so in October at our anniversary conference, we officially laid hands on them. But I had progressively moved us there over the course of the last 3 years. And I did it, obviously all of us are familiar with William Bridges in terms of his model on transitioning all the way back to the late 80s and the 90s. But this, by the time I got to this season of my life, I did it in a very subtle way, but in a very, I borrowed all those concepts, but I wanted the house to really feel safe and secure. And so I layered over the last 3 years how that was going to happen. The challenge for me, and I know, Joe, you and I talked about that transition period for you. I am grateful for what God has done. What I didn't expect, when you spend 4 decades pioneering, building, layering, training, you're in a rhythm. So your weekends there's a rhythm. And for all the duration, I rarely traveled on a Sunday. I would travel during the week. That was just, I made that commitment to the local church. So that shift to now doing the same thing you're doing, it's wonderful. But it doesn't mean on Sundays when I'm home that I don't have, I've had to carve out a place in my heart for sadness and allow that grief to open me up to wisdom and what lies ahead. So that's an ongoing reality. I've tried to you end up thinking that there are just some things that will ultimately go away, and I'm not sure everything always goes away. So, but having said that, I think we need to grieve what has to be grieved, right? And extract wisdom from that, and yet at the same time, I think we need to let closure be intentional. So,
wow. I love that. Grieve what needs to be grieved. That's powerful. I always appreciate your transparency and humility when you disclose what you go through and how you could help others through that journey. So that's great. Kyle, what about you?
Yeah, for me, I went through about a 5 to 6 year process of transitioning. When I was 50, I knew that by the time I was 58, somewhere around there, that it would be time to transition. Prayed about it, start planning seriously, probably the last 3 or 4 months, did a lot to go into it, checked every box, dotted every I, crossed every T, had no idea who the successor would be. When my son emerged about a year and a half to 2 before the transition, we felt grateful. He was the same age I was when I started pastoring. We sensed many aspects of God's hand on it. And I was incredibly diligent for the 5 to 6 years in the transition. So I thought everything would just be incredible. And there would be no aspects of emotional, mental, or physical reality that I would go through. So after the transition service, the next 2 days, I went, go out and pray. I walk around my neighborhood and pray. So the first 2 days, I was just grateful. I was thanking God, just appreciating him for a transition that he was in and everything going well and God bearing witness to it. The third day, I went out to pray, and it was a little bit more praise and celebration and just appreciating God. But at the end of it, when I was getting ready to go and I was just rounding up, Lord, just thank you so much in Jesus' name, he spoke to me clear as day and he said, son, you have to let go. And I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I already did. So when I was up there laying hands on my son, in my heart, in my spirit, I was projecting everything I had to him. It just in my mind, I'm like, God, the anointing, the wisdom, everything you've given me, I release it to this young man. And I was making an intentional effort to give him whatever it's possible to give in the spirit and release everything to him. So when God said to me, son, you have to let go, I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I already did. And about a few minutes later, the Lord said again, son, you have to let go. And I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I did. And the third time, son, you have to let go. And I said, well, sir, I can't remember if I said maybe I didn't or show me how. But in the next 3 to 5 minutes, I had this experience where it's like a weight or a burden. I don't even know what to call it, but something that was on me. Just I felt it leaving off my shoulders. And for the first time in a number of years that I can remember, it's like I'm back in the garden with just me and God. It was a very unique situation. And I had a real sense of now it's just me and you without all of the encumbrances and without all of the things that had to happen. So that was a pretty significant encounter. It was really an encounter. And that set me in a place where, again, I thought that everything was going to be fine. So I was incredibly surprised several weeks into the transition when I began to encounter a significant loss of a sense of value, just worth in a sense. I was shocked by it. And I was like, man, what is this? So I'm looking at everything that by the grace of God I built, in the grace of God, my wife and I and the team around us built for the last 30 years, grateful about a transition, knowing God's in it. But now I'm sitting down, not even going up on stage doing communion or an offering or anything. I just sat and I just wrestled with this loss of a sense of value. Now, some of you on this call might be a little bit more spiritual than I. You might be more, let me see some of Joe's words, theosis and whatever, all those. You might be further along your journey than I am, but I have not been able to divorce a certain sense of value in my life from what I'm able to contribute. Now, I've talked to people over the years, listened to sermons and heard people talk about their identity being in Christ alone and God alone. And I have cultivated the last 20 years of a relationship of intimacy with God. My background was big on that. And I'm pretty settled in the fact that I'm a son. I know I'm loved by God. I'm settled in the fact that I'm part of the bride. And my relationship with God in terms of intimacy is solid. But there is something, I believe it's God ordained, maybe not, maybe it's something I need to grow out of, that part of my value is based on what I'm able to contribute. The Bible's not just a book of relationship, it's a book of fruit. We're going to be judged before the judgment seat of Christ by what we've done in our body. And, I can just take you through scriptures, the parable of the talents, where you take two and multiply. So when I'm there and not valuing anything, God shut me down for about 8 months where I wasn't doing ministry, wasn't doing anything in church. And I wrestled with a sense of value. I prayed my way out of it in about a month and a half where it was no longer there. But I did have that tremendous sense of wrestling with just a sense of worth and value. So I'll just stop there, Joe.
Wow. Wow. Well, we could just stay on that point and deal with the psychological aspects of being a human being or human doer or what it means to be both. But let's move on to the next point. Both of you are amazing and my closest friends in the world. You guys represent people I really trust. So let's go on to something else. Another thing is others have a hard time letting go. So you may have a hard time letting go, but what about other people? So sometimes it's not just us who struggle, but it could be family, friends, colleagues, people closer to us. In this case, members of the church. And it can create tension and confusion, especially if those in your inner circle don't understand why you're moving in a new direction or why things can't stay the same or the way they are. And then you may have even a spouse. You might have people very, very close to you who intellectually uh, know, what you're called to do or believe that you're doing the right thing, but emotionally they can't let go because their proximity to you gave them power in the local context, and they don't have that same power or voice anymore. So that's pretty significant. That happens. So, Dr. Mark, what say you?
Yeah, these are all so vital to our awareness of just the dynamics that take place, because transition is never just about us, right? It's about those we're leading, and trust is not automatic. We build trust through consistency, we build trust through clarity, and we build trust through honor. And one of the things I intentionally did always with Mario and Misty from all the way back, I've always honored and blessed them publicly and privately. That's been part of, there was a day, the older you get, the more you become, at least for me, the older I got, the more I realized how much I needed to give affirmation, because I needed it and I would give it. But somehow, if we can publicly bless those that we are moving into those positions of responsibility long before they get there, we are we're building trust. And as I look back now over even the last 5 years, the more opportunities I gave to Mario to be in the pulpit, the more I realized the wisdom of God and how he was being shaped, and I would constantly just affirm the content, the delivery, his essence. Yeah, that when Kyle was talking about, in the coaching world, and as you know, I've spent 30,000 hours of the last 30 years in the coaching profession. But in coaching, we coach to both essence and performance, because yes, we're human beings, but we also are human beings that are called to accomplish things. And so those creative dynamics and the tension between them, that's a balancing act. And we never want to ever think that we're going to get to a place where that creative tension is going to be gone. Even to the day that we die, all of that is going to be part of our human makeup, our humanness. So the dynamic of recognizing the ways in which trust is developed and how we steer the house in that direction. We also have to, in that, I would say, honor the past while making room and space for the future. And then give people room to process. And people processed, and we didn't think processing was abnormal. We let the processing take place. We let people work through what they had to work through. And I think what the people see now is that there's no power plays. Like when I'm not out traveling, I'm home in that congregation as a member of that house, sitting on the front row, celebrating what God is doing, and counting it a privilege just to be there. And the people see that there's a silent witness by my presence, that there's no power grab. They know I'm bishop. I mean, I'm dad. I built the house, but there's a sense in which they feel really safe in the hands of Mario and Misty, and they're really deeply impacted that because look, we live in a day of toxic leadership. We're watching this whole thing unravel, and people need to see healthy transition. So anyway, that's about what I would weigh in on that, Joe.
Yeah, good stuff. What about you, Kyle? About
Well,
others having a hard time letting go?
yeah, and I think because we recognize the human propensity to latch on, because our brains are actually wired to, in some ways, resist change. Our if you really think about it, our brains amplify that which causes you stress and fear and highs. You know, when we have highs, dopamine is released. It reinforces that thought. Whenever we have fear and anxiety, the amygdala produces a reinforcing of that. So our brains are going to warn us of past pains. Our brains are going to remind us of pleasures, and all of those relationships and all of those things are tied up, and it makes it difficult for people to let go. So I think recognizing that should cause us to have wisdom in transition. It's a lot easier for leaders who have vision to see things that people have to begin to feel and experience. So whenever you're running a relay race, there's a period of time where the two run with the baton together. And I think we just have to think about wisdom in transitions, where we transition, but immediately, if possible, in all settings, it's not possible. It doesn't feel like the transition is that significant. It's not a big drop off. One person of a large church just announced the transition. And right after he announced it, he said, "Hey, I'm still going to be here. In fact, I'm launching a series for the next, I think, 3 or 4 or 5 months." So he transitioned that Sunday, but says, for the next 3 months, I'm going to be here preaching this particular series, which made people feel like, okay, so it's more of a gentle handoff that gives people a chance to allow their emotions to process into it. I did a similar thing in Montgomery, and that helped the people significantly.
Wow. Great, great insights. Here's a third challenge. Those close to you don't discern your new season. So one of the most painful challenges of transition is when those closest to you don't discern what you're stepping into. They may still see you through the lens of your previous roles, experiences, or capabilities. Failing to recognize the new level of responsibility or calling God is placing upon your life. This could lead to misunderstanding, isolation, even feelings of rejection. Even when Jesus began his public ministry, many of his family members and hometown friends didn't recognize his new season. We see that in John chapter 7. This is why it's essential to stay grounded in God's voice and trust his leading, even when others don't fully understand. So I've been blessed to be surrounded by many local leaders and apostolic leaders in CCC, and even my local leaders, and they were praying into what I'm doing now 10, 15 years ago. So they saw it and were pushing me in that direction, and they felt that was what I was supposed to do. So I never had a real challenge with leaders not discerning my season. Um, but yeah, a lot of stuff could be said, but I don't want to take most of the time here. So I'm going to let Dr. Mark and then Bishop Kyle weigh in on this point. Those close to you don't discern your new season. Any thoughts on that, Mark?
Yeah, for me, the reference point for that would have been back in Raleigh. I think I cut my eye teeth in Raleigh when we began to build Orlando as the second campus, and I gradually had to wean away from Raleigh and focus on the Orlando campus. I trust I learned from many of those dynamics, because as I reflected back on that, here we are all these years later, 26 years later. I reflected back on that season and what I would have done differently, because indeed there were people that were projecting their own unmet needs, their own need to cling. You know, Jesus at the tomb, says to Mary, "Stop clinging to me." So there's, there's an ascension that has to take place, and not that she can stop that, but there's those projections. We have to be gracious enough to give that room to process. And while within our immediate circle of leadership here, that wasn't an issue. We functioned as a really well-oiled team in so many ways. And it took us, when we changed the vision and the name of the church from Master's Touch to Church on the Living Edge. That was an 18-month transition years ago, but there was a lot of things we put in place. And that was post my dark season when that 3.5 years of extreme anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, that burned out of me a lot of things that would have been part of my model of leadership that were really inconsequential to what Jesus was up to. So by the time we got here, I reflected back and I gave the people that had those issues room, and was able in many ways to carefully, when they would bring that up, ask them questions about what they were really wrestling with inside to get to the core of their own existential anxieties and fears. I hope I did a decent job, but it's different than it's worlds apart from the major struggles that went on in the transition with the Raleigh Church.
Wow. Kyle?
Yeah, I'll just share that extra care needs to be taken in a marriage relationship during a transition. One of the things I did in learning about transition, I went to several workshops with Sam Chand, good friend of mine. Sam's done thousands of these, and he made a statement in 2 of them. He said, I've done thousands of these transitions, and out of the thousands that I've done, 70% worked, 30% probably didn't work. But in 100% of the cases, those that didn't work, it usually had to do with the spouse. And a lot of times it had to do with the wife, not really understanding the new roles. And he gave reasons why. That's not just a gender statement. Because a pastor, a lot of times, is engaged in his ministry for 20, 30 years. Sometimes the wife is not as engaged. She's raising the children, taking care of home. Now the children are grown and gone, and she's now just getting her hands around wanting to begin to move forward in ministry and feeling a sense of real calling and value. And then the mother in her wants to really latch on. Then you snatch her away from all of that. And that can be a very significant move where you see clearly that the grace has shifted. Their grace in some ways is just beginning to kick up. So, and then sometime the incoming lady also, the pastor's wife also that's coming in. So you have to make sure those relationships are really nurtured properly in terms of others around you understanding the transition period.
Yep. You make a really, really good point about that. Okay. We could spend an hour just on that point. Okay, number 4, another challenge out of 7 in transition is you don't fully understand your new season. And so sometimes we're in a state of liminality where we're called to leave one place, but we don't know what the next phase even looks like fully. And I tell people all the time, I don't know specifics on what I'm supposed to do in the future. I just have a sense of my purpose. I have a sense of mission, but I can't tell you exactly what I'm supposed to do in another year or 2 or whatever. Now, that doesn't mean somebody can't get a blueprint from the Lord or a 3-year plan or 5. I'm not saying that, but oftentimes there is always, I'll say often, I don't want to say always, there's a state of liminality where we left one place and we're in the middle between 2 places and we don't even know what the next stage looks like. And so that could be very disorientating, because you don't fully belong to your old season, but you don't even understand your new season. And I remember when I transitioned out of the church and I knew I already had, CCC and ICAL. I was, and still am the ambassador, global ambassador, and I have responsibilities there, but I didn't fully understand what I was called to do. And I can't say I fully understand that now. And I remember asking a close friend of mine who doesn't live in the States, and I said, just help me define who is Joseph Mattera. What am I supposed to be doing? And because I wanted an objective answer from somebody who isn't in proximity to me the way everyone else is in, let's say CCC or something. So I really value the opinion of other people At the end of the day, you got to know what God is saying. I don't have that sense of liminality as strong as I did 2 years ago or a year ago because things are becoming more clear. And some of, close friends around me are getting, pictures about things I'm supposed to be doing that is helping me. So, but I think that's a really challenging state. And man, there's so much we could say about that. So, Mark, what do you say about the state of liminality?
Yeah, I've talked a lot about liminality. I've written about it. In the world of lifespan development and psychology, if we look at the decade orientations, moving through the decades, there are all sorts of psychological dynamics that all of us go through. But at the end and the beginning of a decade, that 3 years prior into is generally a space of transition. And ironically, my transition began at 67 when I got the PhD and was finished with school. And at 70, we turned the church over. And clearly, I was in liminal space and still am in some ways in liminal space. That we never, I call it a territory without maps. And one thing I've had to do is get in touch with the deeper, more unconscious realities that govern us that we need to become conscious of. So when David says in Psalm 139, "You've searched me and known me, you know my down sitting," he goes there. But then in the middle, he's going through real struggles in his life, right? He's got physical enemies, he's got spiritual enemies, he's wondering where he is. So at the end, he says, "Lord, search me and know me, try me and know my anxious thoughts and see if there be any here." So David is essentially in a liminal space, and he knows there's aspects of himself he cannot fully get to until he owns the anxiety from having crossed that threshold. We never enter into new territory without crossing a threshold, and the threshold always involves anxiety. So we are in liminal space, and I have often said I'm in a territory without maps. It's getting more clear now, but three things. Because of the anxiety I had, and because I went through a really profoundly dark season with anxiety, I don't react to it the way I used to, and it's not as intense as it was, thank the Lord. But what I've discovered within existential psychology and within depth psychology, because at the core of our being, we think in metaphors and images, I began to pay attention to my dreams more carefully. And the Lord has been really faithful in inviting me to get in contact with what's going on at a deeper level. But there's this cord of three strands: anxiety, ambiguity, and ambivalence. And at a mature level, if we can manage the anxiety in a healthy way, we live in the creative tension between ambivalence and ambiguity while we're waiting for clarity to emerge. Clarity doesn't come overnight. Clarity takes time. Moses is on the backside of the desert for 40 years until he is far enough removed from where he has been to enter into an era he's never been into. So that liminal space of that 40 years becomes essential to his preparation. He's in a territory without maps. And so for me, and I'll just be really transparent, there was enough that was going on in my life that was demanded attention when I finished the PhD. I had developed a really close relationship with a Christian depth psychologist who's become a mentor. And I've studied Jung for 40 years. I've been very careful how I integrate depth psychology with theology. I've been very meticulous about that, very careful, very aware of how to do that well and how not to violate in such a way that theology is not overshadowed by psychology. But one of the things that helped me is that I have developed a very close relationship with this depth psychologist, and every 2 weeks we have a conversation. And so just when we are in liminal space, Bridges says we're in that nowhere between a former somewhere that we can't go back to and a new somewhere we don't know where it is yet. And we can never get through that space alone. We always need someone to help pull us through that. And I've known that for years and years and have applied that in mentoring with people. So I realized I had enough recognition in myself to know I don't want to go through this alone. And so I developed a really close, trusting relationship with an 85-year-old depth psychologist who loves the Lord. And he's just been a sounding board, and it's been really great. And he's helped me work through my dreams because he's a Jungian analyst, and helped me work through all the emotions that go along with it. And so clarity is a process of coming. And I'm grateful for that because I don't know that any of us wants to try to, I mean, unless you're a genius and know how to be so self-aware that you don't need any input from anybody else. I'm going to be just honest and let you know I need help getting to where I'm going, and I'm not ashamed to say when I know how to ask for help when I need it.
Amen. You and me both. I definitely need help in where I'm going. Kyle, any words on this? And then what we're going to do is we're going to combine the last 3 points. They're very related just to save time because we have to wrap this up at 11:15. But go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I just want to share not to fear that season. I definitely went through it for about 8 or 9 months. And in that time frame, there was absolute chaotic unclarity about who I was, what I was to do, the next steps. I too lean. Kevin Matthews, who's on this call, is somebody who every 2 days would hear a new vision of how I would emerge or whatever. He helped me walk through this in a significant way. But I've realized that it is one of the most valuable things that you could ever encounter. And so I just share not to fear that season. It kind of reminds me of a story of a guy who had trees, I think somewhere out in the deserts of California. And when others were watering their trees, he would only water his trees a little bit. And his trees would look different from everybody else's. Theirs would be nice and green. His would be somewhat brown, but still alive. And he would deny them a significant amount of water. And one day there was a drought. And when the drought came, everyone else's trees died, but his trees were flourishing. And his neighbors came by and said, man, what's going on? He said, well, when you guys were flourishing with abundant water, I was denying mine. So I forced the roots of my trees to go deeper to find water. And because there's drought now, my trees have deeper roots than yours. That liminal season forces you to find deeper roots in who you really are, what you're really about, who you're really called to be in God. And when you emerge and begin emerging from that, it's at a very safe, much more secure place. So just encourage you not to fear that season. God's with you in every step of the way.
Wow. Wow. Both of you giving profound wisdom to all of us. The next point, practical point, sometimes in this transition, not only do you not know how to strategize or what's next in your natural wisdom, but you're not even sure where the money is coming from or where the resources are going to be. And I remember even speaking to Dr. Mark about this a year and a half ago, because there was an adjustment in what the church was giving me because their own budget couldn't continue to give me the same benefits and salary I used to get. And I didn't know how I was going to pay my mortgage and what I was going to do moving forward. And I remember Mark said to me, Joe, don't worry about it. God's got you. Your mortgage will be paid. He's not leaving you. God's getting you through this season. And and I remember at one point I was in a tough spot with the finances because of this adjustment, and out of nowhere, somebody sent me a check for $25,000. And and just that day or the day before, I was like in a place of believing God. I said, God, I'm not worried. I'm not going to be anxious. I'm trusting you've got me. And then this check comes, and I said, oh man, that's amazing. I should just never doubt you, Lord. Right? and so, and God has since given me some strategy and uh, just gifts do come out of nowhere. Incredible stuff. Many from this table have blessed me out of nowhere. Not like I've even asked or anything. So, and you know who you are, but that's a real challenge sometimes when you and like Mark said, part of liminality, that rite of passage, is anxiety, and part of the anxiety might even be financial. So you need to know that God is leading you. You need to, that's what I trust. I said, God, I believe I can't stay where I was, but yet I don't know how I'm going to make it financially where I'm going now in this place. And of course, you get attacked in your mind. Oh man, did I make a mistake? Your default position, hey, start another church or do something else, you know. But I knew, no, hold your ground and go forward. So, uh, Mark, what do you say about this phase, the practical, believe in God of resources, finances that's involved maybe in this rite of passage?
Yeah, growing up Italian in New York, that was the big worry, right? I mean, I inherited anxiety about money. Well, ironically, though, for me, just by way of transparency, years ago when we were on staff in Palisades Park, New Jersey, and the Lord told us that we were going to travel full time, um, that was the biggest leap of faith I ever had to take, to trust God for provision. Since then, whether it was Raleigh or Orlando, I have never taken a salary from the church. I've been the biggest giver, still am in the Orlando church. And now, the last 4 or 5 years, I get something every week, but it goes right back in the offering. I've become used to just relying on God. And I've never asked for a meeting. I've never worked the room when all my friends would work the room at conferences to get preaching dates. I've never done that. I won't do that. So and now I'm even at 70, I've got confidence God will provide. And so I'll tell you a story, and you can do with this what you will. But years ago, when Dr. Cho wrote The Fourth Dimension, Jack Home, who was a very dear, close personal friend and part of the Fellowship of Christian Assemblies, which I was a part of, Salem Gospel Tabernacle, Jack had befriended me, and he infused faith into me in a really remarkable way. He had come back from Korea, was in Oregon, and then ended up in Chicago at Matson Bose's church, where Al Smith was pastoring, and he helped Al Smith build that house on cell groups and everything else. But Jack was instrumental in inviting me to believe God for provision, and in more ways than I can even imagine at the moment. But there came a point where I can't remember if it was Jack or just me reading Cho, just listen for the phone to ring. So I remember I'm sitting in Richfield Park, New Jersey. All of our furniture is about ready to be put in storage. We're going to be, all I have is one meeting in Wheeling, West Virginia, and a brand new van for traveling that's going to cost me tons of money to put gas in, and only 1 week of meetings, and just agonizing to hear the phone ring. And it was like the Lord said, just imagine the phone's going to ring, is what he was saying. And all I can tell you is that was 1982. The phone hasn't stopped ringing. And that's just been, I think, God's way with me of reminding me that even if I got a salary, I'm still walking by faith, not by sight. My provision is the Lord. And that's been the way in which I've approached. So I'm not worried about my future in that sense. There's a lot of areas I worry about, but God kind of really has helped me deal with the deep money beliefs I inherited growing up in a dysfunctional Italian setting. So I have faith for finances.
Amen. That's great. Kyle?
Yeah, what he said. No, let me add just a little bit to that. We think that it was the ministries that we built that was taking care of us and providing for us in the last season, but it was God then, and it'll be God now. And we actually have to go through a process of really learning that. I went through that process. I immediately started, I'm a pilot. I started putting in applications to every major airline thinking I'm going to have to do something different. And the Lord quickly arrested that, where a surprise came. The largest gift I've ever received in my ministry to date history just showed up on my doorstep, where God was showing, buddy, it never was the ministry. It was always me. So God will keep you in this season of transition.
Wow. Both very powerful. Two last points that I'm going to put together. In transition, unless your transition is to retire, which is also a last possible phase for some, so we're not belittling that, but assuming the transition is to something with more responsibility, you're going to have the 6 point. Another challenge is a higher level of pressure in this new season and a higher level of spiritual warfare and resistance. And uh, and so I looked at my 40 years pastoring as preparation for what I'm doing now. And we all know that pastoring a church is filled with a lot of pressure, stress, and you got to believe God for everything, and then you got to walk in strategy and all that. And I knew that the new phase I was going to walk in was going to have a different set of challenges. I remember one time a spirit of prayer came on me in the late 90s, and I had a deep travail for 3 to 8 hours a day. I had to alter my schedule, tell my secretary, don't schedule anything until late in the afternoon because I can't even talk to somebody. And that lasted for 3 years, from January 2nd, 1998, I think it started, to January 2nd, the year 2000. 3 years straight to the day it stopped. Um, and while I was in the midst of that, I didn't even know what I was praying and groaning about. I thought it was for revival and awakening, and it was. And it probably had to do with 9/11 too, and I didn't realize the looming danger. We had a sense there was a looming danger. If you read my book, Travail to Prevail, you would think I wrote the book after 9/11, but I wrote it in 98 before 9/11. So the prophetic intercessors all knew something was coming. So part of it was that. But then I said, Lord, what else? What am I groaning about? And he said something so profound. He said, you are exchanging devils because I'm taking you out of hiding. And he was showing me that I was going to have a more public ministry uh, starting in the 2000s. And so I was getting ready for a greater spiritual depth and rootedness in the Lord that could handle more demonic resistance. And certainly there was a new level of pressure along with some of the new things I was doing. And now there's uh, other levels of pressure dealing with some massive movements in the world that I'm involved with. So there's greater level of pressure and a higher level of spiritual warfare. The old saying, a new level, new devil, I think has some truth to it. So um, as we wrap this up, we can combine those 2 points: a higher level of pressure, responsibilities, and a higher level of spiritual warfare and resistance. That's another challenge to transition. So, Mark and Kyle, what do you guys think?
You know, it's interesting. I'll make this as brief as I can. If I look back at my history, and I've had to reflect back on it quite a bit lately, I was on the Apostolic Council for Azusa with Carlton. I was one of the 3 founding pastors of the International Congress of Local Churches with Donnie Mears and Luther Blackwell. Both conferences built to a sizable amount to reach pastors. And we had a lot of zeal back in those days. We made these covenant commitments to one another that we would walk out our lives together. Well, that never happened because life happens. And the world has so radically changed that whatever I envisioned in my 40s for the church to be like now that I'm 70, all of that got shattered and destroyed in the last decade and a half. So I didn't expect to be here. And here for me includes what I used to listen to when Judson Cornwall and Bob Mumford and others back in my generation would talk about in terms of the burden of the Lord. And with all the abuses of the prophetic and with all the ways in which there's been a conflation of the gospel with ideology, I have had to allow the weight of the burden of the Lord to hit me in a way I never expected. So I carry a lot of sadness for the body of Christ. And as a bishop of the church, I feel a certain responsibility. So part of where I am, Joe, and for the sake of all the men and women of God that are on, I'm having to discern what do I say and how do I say it in love and wisdom and build from a place of empathy, raise questions that can invite reflection, because we are in such a desperate place that when we talk about the global outpouring of the Spirit right now, because of what's happening globally, because of the way within 8 seconds you can put something on social media and it can reach the whole world, there are so many competing ideologies proclaiming Jesus in the middle of those ideologies that we have our work cut out for us. And so there is warfare that's tied to that. There's also the burden of the Lord. And I think it's a sobering reality that all of us that love the church, love God's people, love the move of God, we're going to have to navigate these waters with wisdom and stay true to the apostolic preaching of the cross, and in some way summon the emerging generations to recognize the dangers of consumer Christianity and all the toxic ways in which toxic systems have produced toxic leaders. And so with that, for me, there comes a sadness. I'll go to bed at night with sadness. I'll wake up weeping. I'm that's kind of where I'm at from a perspective of how I see what's emerging. So at some level, I didn't expect to be here at this season. I thought it was going to be a whole different world I was going to be a part of. So I'm learning how to adjust.
Wow. Deep stuff. Wow. Kyle?
Yeah, I think part of the warfare is also in that season of uncertainty. The enemy tries to define your certainty in a demonic way. He'll try to imprint his agenda on your mind. So I do think that the enemy recognizes the in-between, the liminal space that we're in, and he tries to push things and establish things, and frankly, sow seeds that will manifest in the harvest in days ahead. So we have to be aware of that. It's interesting, at the beginning of my season, right before I entered into it, the Lord just showed clearly, as he always does, the plans of the enemy and strategies of the enemy to beware of during this season. So I think just that liminality alone causes the enemy to try to push those buttons. I could share instances throughout scripture where that's a reality. So a transition season does produce, I don't want to say more warfare, because the truth is there's a consistency of warfare I've always encountered as long as I've been a believer. But I think the strategy becomes different because the season we're in becomes different. But the same God who kept us in the previous season can keep us in this season. But we do need to be aware and have our eyes open.
Do you want to share the book you wrote?
Sure. Can I share my screen, please?
It's already your co-host, so
I'm
go.
co-host. Good. I always knew I'd be somebody. Let's
You
see.
were elevated. Wow. You transitioned. You were elevated today.
I'm elevated. Wonderful. Let me see how I can get this here. All right. Share. Oop. All right. Can everybody see my screen?
I'm glad you put my church in that title.
Why is that?
If you just said how I successfully transitioned,
Oh, okay. So there's a book I wrote. Let me try to get back to that last screen on, it's going the wrong way. Give me a second here. Let me do that again. 1 second here. Okay, how do I go back? Yeah, so there's a book I wrote on how I successfully transitioned my church. What I wanted to do in this book is be incredibly practical. I just wanted to offer help to anybody that's out there. So what I did is just put down how I did it, just my journey. Chapter 1, the inevitability of succession. You're going to have to succeed one way or another. Transition, succession versus transition. The first steps I took, the phased approach that I took, how I developed the incoming pastor, the leadership lessons I did, when I met with him, what I did, the actual transition service, how I structured it, what I said, what I didn't say, why I said it. Chapter 7 and 8 are chapters I really love. It's just my experience, things I've learned about transition. Chapter 8, what I would do differently if I had to do it all over again. So it's actually an ebook, and you can get it through kcsleadership.com. That's the website, kcsleadership.com. It's available for an instant download. That QR code can get you to it as well. I'm assuming it works through the Zoom. So kcsleadership.com is the website, and that's the QR code that'll get you to it. So again, my goal was just to be helpful. Ray Mott, if he's on this call, is the reason this book exists. Bishop Ray Mott said to me more than 5 to 7 times, he said, Bishop, you've got to write down your experience. We need it. So if you're on here, Bishop Ray, you have to buy no less than 10. No, you got a free book coming from me. Hopefully it'll be a great blessing to you.
All right. Well, the first 100 people who sow $1,000 into CCC will get a free book.
Oh, I thought you said 10,000. You reduced it.
Oh, I want to extend the time. I normally end it by 11:15, but if anybody, I think this is so important. Um, we'll give it another 10 minutes. If Mark has to go, of course, but I want to open it up for questions or comments, especially if you have questions for one of the three of us. Anybody? Questions or comments? Dan Gilbert, is that you? You have your hand up?
Yeah, both questioning and comment. Transitioning, I think what I heard from all of you, and here's my question, is when your spouse or your children or child for me are struggling with that transition from being a pastor's wife, this happened, to no longer be a pastor's wife, but a professor's wife that didn't have any really role. How did y'all handle that ministering to your spouse? So that's the question. And then a comment. This has been so good for me because, as you know, Dr. Joe and Kyle, I've transitioned from the academic world into our living by faith and ministry and starting Bible schools around the world. That's the vision anyway. So some of the same things that y'all have shared of what we've been going through. And I really appreciate you sharing your hearts, all of you just being totally open. Thanks so much.
Yeah, Mark or Kyle, you want to answer that question?
Yeah, again, for Ruth and I, the bigger transition was Raleigh. By the time we got here, she started saying to me 5 years ago, honey, when are you going to transition? We just need to think about where we're going. So she was like, she's like really happy that I did this. The challenge for me is that I said, well, honey, I'm not going to be an old horse that goes out to pasture. I'm still going to find places to preach. I'm going to still write. And so so she's having to adjust to the fact that, not that we do have us time, but for me, the bigger challenge for her was Raleigh was wonderful, and we also went through some major stresses and pains, and so that was the harder transition for her from there to here. From here to where we are now, she's happy as a lark. So I'm the only one suffering in this one, is what I'm going to say, Dan.
Wow. Kyle, anything else to add?
Yeah, My wife never really transitioned as much as we did. She still cares for the members of the church like she did. She has her own ministry that it's 5,000 women across the world that she does. So she never really felt a real sense of transition. But anytime there's transition with any person, it's the same thing when you deal with a loved one who lost someone. A lot of hugs, a lot of time, a lot of understanding, a lot of patience through the process of finding the next are things that help every transition.
Wow. Wow. Okay, Raul Burgos has his hand up.
Yeah, mine is a quick comment, and it's in line of the last comment and question by Dr. Gilbert. I am ready to transition, but my wife is not. I'm dying to transition. And I can't figure this one out. I never felt so trapped in a decision. I'm very pragmatic, but this is one I can't figure out. So just go by saying this, I think it's a core that maybe one day we can just dedicate I don't know, maybe a full table, because this is definitely where I'm at. I appreciate everyone's comment and input on it.
Raul, just by way of just immediate feedback, always, whenever there's resistance to transition, there's underlying anxiety, and under that, there's a root fear. So anxiety is the logical mind's attempt to resolve the underlying fear. The anxieties are what ifs, but they're always tethered to some sort of an unobvious unconscious fear. If there's a way you can come alongside your wife and help her explore what she's afraid of, that can help loosen it up a bit.
You guys alluded to it. She does not feel she's fulfilled her role. She felt all along that I was doing my thing, and she was kind of tagging along. But now that I want to transition, she said, wait a second, I don't feel that. I still have much more to do. That's exactly what I think it is. Like, if I transition the way I feel like I would like to, she would miss on her full purpose.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
So there's a real fear that something's going to be missing in her life, right? That there's going to be a void and the question becomes, how does that void get fulfilled and filled so that she doesn't feel an absence? So I'll definitely be praying for you.
And I would too. And Raul, let's talk offline. I've got a thought for you. It might be prophetic. We'll find out when I talk to you whether it's prophetic or pathetic, but I've got something for you. There's sometimes a way to transition without a full transition, and I think it might be helpful to you. So let's talk offline.
I would love to.
Okay, well, if you don't have each other's contact info, just text me. All right, Israel Pena has his hand up.
Yeah, mine is brief. By the way, this is awesome. I thank you for your transparency. We need to hear that. When I was in Israel a couple of years ago, I realized that they were excavating the city of David, and there was a lot of mess in the process. The transition, if we're talking about transition, it was at a lower level, right? So all of the city of David was being excavated, and the mess of progression looks like the mess of digression. And sometimes, I'm listening to all of this and I'm realizing that even as one is trying to move and transition in their progression, people externally will take a look at that and assume because it's messy, right? Because again, the mess of digression and progression, they kind of look the same at a certain point. And so if not understood and not explained, it looks like, okay, things are going bad, but it's actually they're becoming better. My question is to kind of distinguish those two areas of transition. What do you do? Because they look the same. How do you explain that to the people? How do you get them to understand this is a progression? It's not a digression. The room is messy. It still looks like a mess, but it's not mess because of us going backwards. It's a mess because we're pulling all the stuff out and it looks messy.
So Israel, I'm wanting to think through this. I don't know if I'm hearing you correctly, because I'm hearing this in terms of, if we use the metaphor, of the excavation of the ancient city of David. You got to dig deep in order to get to the city. There's obviously something valuable there in that ancient excavation that has bearing on here, right? So if we think about that in terms of understanding the times is plural, past, present, and future. So even in transition, we've got to take into account that even when we're not conscious of history, history is influencing the present moment. There is always the weight of the past, the push of the present, and the pull of the future. And they all converge in the present moment. And if we are going to understand that which was, that which is, that which shall be, we have to be able to inform from a very loving perspective the entire congregation of how the weight of the past is influencing this present moment and how the push of the present is bringing us into the pull of the future, and how all three have to be reconciled in order for us to move into what God has. That's like a Cliff Notes version, but I think that's tied to future studies, but all of it is important. We never get past our history. I know we like to think when Paul says forgetting what lies behind, he's not talking about dissing history. That's what we do in postmodernism. We diss history, and that's not what he's talking about at all there.
Absolutely. Kyle, did you
Amen
want
to
say
that.
something?
I say totally amen to that. And also, how do we get people to see the mess and where it's going? And the way to do that is always by vision. When you walk into a store and they're renovating it, they have a picture of the remodeled one there. So you always see where we're going. And if you keep the vision of why before them, what I did was consistently put in the minds of people how churches die out when they get to the stage ours is. So 10 years from now, we could be where we've got X number of members left and all of us have dentures, or we could be, we could be another vibrant, growing church full of young energy that's good for the next 50 to 70 years. So just keeping vision before people of what it's going to be when this mess is cleared up is one of the ways to navigate that season, Israel.
Perfect. One last question, then we'll have to wrap it up. David and Leila Tyree.
Yeah, I'm going to be quick as possible. I really want to thank and honor you all three. I guess for less than a year now, we've been getting more yoked with Pop Matera and CCC. I've jumped on Mark Sharona's proximity. Like, this has been such a culmination of a deep well that I really believe God has given us more insight, understanding. And as an athlete, I've lived a life of transition up to this third, and many while I'm still getting to know many of you over time, I'm so grateful. But I just really want to acknowledge the glory. And I feel like, the Lord was kind of showing me there's a glory that is coming. So this is just to edify what I've received already in a short amount of time. He was really giving me a little bit of insight into the beauty of this table. And I shared this with some of my people, that the diversity of our generation, of our ethnicity, and the times is gonna be, it's almost like the coat of many colors that Joseph had. And this is just to edify you all three. I've been kind of connected in my heart. I've reached out to Kyle, and you guys are leading this table on transition. I've always felt like that's been a big part of our journey in the kingdom, in life. And we, in transparency, we were drawn to the house church in 2010, and that model, for lack of better terms, and we have now planted 14 churches, and we know we're in a new season. We know it's been a time of transition. And also, I've been more connected to Pop Matera because I felt like the Lord revealed to me that he has been a father in transition to me. So I just really wanted to bless you guys and kind of wash this table to acknowledge the significance, the radiance, and the beauty of what God is doing in CCC right now, in the times that we are in the world, and what God would desire for us, even as we're moving forward. So thank you. I acknowledge this wonderful beauty, and I'll give my wife a chance.
And I'm gonna be quick too. This is so timely personally, and similar to what he's saying, it really has been. So the transition and, not totally having clarity in this time, but I was just having a conversation with my husband. We We got married in 04, but we had already had a son. And, you know, I went to school, I had a degree, I meet Christ. I decide to stay home for a period of time at homeschool. Then in 2019, I get back into the marketplace. We open a store. And then, you know, my mom gets really sick. She passes away in December. And through all of that, we're doing ministry, we're making disciples. And now here I am, and I find that I'm in this place. And kind of to what you're saying, Dr. Chirona, which is I'm experiencing all these anxieties and having to really search and really meditate on my heart in relation to, man, what is it? And part of that is really the first time where I don't feel like I have clarity. I can't see what's ahead or what I'm kind of clinging to. I'm the type of person that, you know, like if I know where I'm going, then I can move that direction. I can go that way. And I feel honestly, the anxiety is this sense of uselessness, to be perfectly honest. Like I feel so useless and it's terrifying. And I'm just, you know, I've been giving myself to the Lord, to the word of God. And I really just want to know, like, how should I really be positioning myself in this time so that I can maximize the time? And, you know, I really don't want to be here anymore. So, you know, that's my question.
Thank y'all.
Well, Mark or Kyle, any comment on especially what Leila was saying?
Sounds like a
I
Florida.
I think I would encourage the positioning is an internal posture, right? It's a place of trust. It's a childlike trust. It's a place of openness. And I think we need to pay attention to three voices and how they interfere with that still small voice. The voice of fear, the voice of judgment, and the voice of cynicism. All three voices are part of that inner critical voice. The enemy uses them, but they're our voice as well, right? It's not always easy to discern, this is the devil, this is me, because we can really beat ourselves up. We're really good at judging. We're really good at being cynical. We're really good at being fearful. And those three voices, we have to learn how to discern them more subtly as we grow, and learn how to observe them and recognize where they're trying to take us, and always come back to a center of the silence, capital S, that is the still small voice. That would be the internal posture that I would say would be a way to approach moving forward.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I just saw a picture of you, Sister Tyree, and you were just sort of in the hands of the Lord. He had you cuddled, almost like a parent will cuddle a child. And there are just some things happening where it's a season of trust. So denying those voices that are speaking into the season and letting God fully have his way with you. There's some things that are happening that are so wonderful. When your eyes open, you'll understand that this season hurts so good. The Lord's doing some very significant things in you and with you during this season.
Kyle, why don't you pray for the Tyrees as we close and then just pray in general for this table? Go ahead.
Father, I'm so grateful for your love for us, the fact that you're miles ahead of us, light years ahead of us. You always declare the end from the beginning. So the things that we agonize over, the things that we wrestle with, the things that we are unsure of, the space we call liminal is not that with you. You know, you've already decided, declared, you always see. So Father, as you're walking with us through these uncertain seasons, may your grace be plentiful. We bring Brother Tyree before you, Sister Tyree before you. We thank you for the season they're in. Thank you for all the transitions they've navigated. And you've been the same God in every transition. And as we look back, God, you've been faithful throughout every transition, and you're faithful in this transition. But we ask you to bring clarity, bring direction, finish what you're doing, finish the process, but bring clarity and bring direction. We thank you that we always emerge better when we stay connected to you and in you. Transition, God, from the enemy's standpoint is about a loss of faith. when you said to Peter, Satan has desired to have you, but I pray that your faith will not fail. So God, let all of us keep our faith strong in these processes of uncertainty, difficulty, faith in you, faith in the future, faith that you've already worked something out that we're walking toward, and faith that he who began a good work in us will complete it unto the end. We thank you. We give you praise. We honor you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Wow, what a great table as usual. My thanks to my dear, dear friends, Dr. Mark and Bishop Kyle, and all of you as we do life together. We try to meet at least twice a year, but you know, these weekly Zooms are also phenomenal. So thank you all for being a part.
Amen. Yes.
Take your mutes off and just say goodbye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Kyle.
Holy.
God bless
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Awesome
Thank you.
table.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Amen.
Blessings all.
Appreciate it. God bless you.
Blessings, everyone.
Bless you
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
God bless. Bye-bye.